So, here's our own Finance Minister and Acting Assistant Treasurer, the hard-working Senator Matthias Cormann, talking to us from the nation's capital in Canberra. Welcome back to the show, Senator Cormann.
Good to be back.
Now, big weekend for you. The first news of that Medibank private IPO. This is at this stage just a pre-registering, but just tell us the timing of it, what exactly you're announcing, and our viewers are aware there are rules about spruiking, but within the context of why this is important.
Well, what we started yesterday as part of our orderly and methodical process to proceed and progress the sale of Medibank Private is the opportunity for members of the public and also policyholders of Medibank Private to pre-register their interest in a Medibank Private share offer prospectus. The prospectus is expected to be released towards the end of October, always subject to market conditions, of course. But I mean, right now, the members of the public are encouraged to register their interest, and of course, policyholders who do register their interest will have the opportunity to apply for a greater number of shares as a recognition of their commitment to Medibank Private. Now,
I know when we were in the US earlier, the conference, the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue, I think you're in New York, I'm sure you've been talking overseas. What level of interest are you getting from the global market? Because this is a global float, even though we've started with pre-registration here in Australia. This is going to be of interest globally, isn't it?
Well, it is going to be of interest globally. It is a significant float globally, and I think I heard you say earlier the second largest this year after Alibaba, and that is certainly the advice that I've consistently been receiving. Now, the way the process works is that we will conduct the general retail offer directed at mums and dads across Australia first. We will then open up the opportunity to institutional investors both here in Australia domestically and overseas. You know, obviously the fact that we've pressed the button on proceeding with the sale this calendar year is testimony to the fact that our advice is that market conditions are strong and that the interest is expected to be strong.
Okay, how do you break it down between overseas interest and local interest? You said you're opening it to the retail first. Does that mean if you could take it all up locally you would, or are you putting aside some, and if so, what percentage for overseas investors?
Well, I mean, those final decisions will be made, obviously, once we have a clearer indication of the level of retail and institutional interest. Right now, what we've encouraged all people right across Australia to do is to pre-register their interest on the Medibank private shareoffer.com.au website or by phone. Of course, you know, we will still need to put the final touches to the prospectus over the coming weeks, and that prospectus is expected to be lodged with ASIC and then publicly released late in October.
But could you say that the majority will go locally? I mean, how do you'll take advice presumably from your advisors, but how do you balance the mums and dads, as you say, with what will be big global interest?
Well, I mean, we've obviously, the way we've structured the sale process is that the general retail offer targeted at mums and dads proceeds first. It's the first phase of the sale process, and then the institutional phase runs second. And obviously, at the right time, we will be taking advice and we'll be making some judgments on how most appropriately to structure the final sale arrangements.
This move to look after the mum and dad investors, which is an obvious thing to do, but is it also a smart political move, given that the Labor Party is complaining about this? You know, Medibank is a sacrosanct name to them. Does this help ease any concerns the public might have if they think they can be in there and make a buck?
Well, I mean, our focus here is, I mean, we've got a series of objectives with the sale. The first objective is that we want to contribute to a competitive and viable private health insurance market. And you've got to remember that Medibank Private is a commercial business which operates in a well-functioning, well-regulated, competitive market with 33 other health funds. We also want to ensure that service levels remain high, in particular in rural and regional Australia. We want to ensure that Medibank employees are well treated, and we want to minimise post-sale risks for the Commonwealth. And subject to all of those objectives, we want to maximise the net return for taxpayers from the sale of Medibank Private. Now, the way we're conducting this sale is a straightforward initial public offering. It is a process that is structured consistent with the advice, the best advice that we've received from our joint lead managers, who are obviously experts in how to conduct those sales. And this is not about politics. This is about achieving the best possible net return for taxpayers, subject to some of the other considerations that I've mentioned.
On that basis, where will the funds go? If you do get, I think it's up to $4 billion, depending on the market, where do those funds go?
Well, we haven't put a figure on it as the seller of the asset. What we've said is that it's up to the market to determine the value of Medibank Private, and that's why we're engaged in this process now. And what we've said for some time is that the proceeds from the sale of Medibank Private will be reinvested in productivity-enhancing infrastructure as part of our economic action strategy, our strategy to build a stronger, more prosperous economy.
So it goes back to consolidate revenue. Does it cut the deficit? Where do you see it being the most benefit?
No. Well, as I've said, it will be reinvested in productivity-enhancing infrastructure, and logistically it will be reinvested through our asset recycling initiative. So the way to look at this, I mean, so if I may, the reason we're proceeding with the sale of Medibank Private primarily is because there's no reason why in 2014 the federal government should be involved in running a private health insurance business. It is a well-functioning and competitive market. There's no market failure, so there's no reason for all that capital that is ultimately owned by taxpayers to be tied up in that business. We also believe that Medibank Private in private hands will be able to perform better, even better than what they're performing now, and so deliver better services for their customers. And finally, we'll be able to release the capital and reinvest it for better purposes as part of our broader strategy to build a stronger economy.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about making it more efficient. Indeed, their own managing director has said today he's already flagged cost cutting as a way to boost profits. You've said you don't think premiums will go up, but this will then be a private business, so you lose that control on that if they want to slash and burn and have to make a profit, don't they?
Well, I mean, the thing is, we do believe that this, well, not only do we believe, we're very confident that the sale is not going to push up the cost of premiums. And I mean, don't take our word for it. The ABC fact checkers, hardly apologies for a coalition government, have confirmed that that is the case. And the reason is very simple. Medibank Private, whether in public ownership or in private ownership, will have to continue to compete for customers with 33 other funds. And if they were to increase their premiums by too much, they would lose their customers. Now, and furthermore, in Australia, premium changes are regulated, and those regulatory changes, those regulatory arrangements won't change as a result of the sale. Now, when it comes to the cost side of the Medibank private business, I mean, it's a truism that businesses in private hands are likely to be more efficient over time than those sorts of businesses in government ownership. And certainly we do believe that that is part of being able to unlock better value for both customers as well as for the shareholders of Medibank Private down the track.
The timing, as you said, it'll be towards the end of October. The prospectus is out. I think people are looking at late November, maybe early December. There's a lot of talk at the moment that the market's got the wobbles. October is traditionally a risky time anyway. There's also the Santa Claus rally in December, but obviously are you a bit nervous in your position watching the market when you've got a big float like this? Because most people are when they're floating.
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, we are responsible, and we take that responsibility very seriously, and we've taken advice, and the best advice that is available to us is that the market conditions are right to proceed with the sale prior to the end of the calendar year. Now, having said that, we obviously continue to monitor market conditions, and if there was a material change in market conditions, we have the flexibility to adjust the timing or the structure of the sale accordingly. Now, you know, obviously, right now we're involved in the pre-registration process. There are still further steps along the way, and all other things being equal, we would expect Medibank Private to list on the stock exchange in early December. Okay,
I am going to take a short break here, and then we're going to get back to that announcement you made on Friday about the budget deficit and a few other things. If you can just hold on, and viewers, stay with us too. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back. I'm here in conversation with Finance Minister Senator Matthias Cormann in Canberra. Senator, on Friday you announced the final figure on the budget deficit for the year, $48.5 billion. That was a $30 billion blowout. Now, a lot of this is the problem is tax revenues. Given the fall in the iron ore price and, as we said, mercurial markets, you can never forecast ahead. Do you get worried you'll have the same problem that your predecessors had with forecasting and declining revenues that you don't have much control over?
Well, firstly, I've got to correct you there. So the final budget outcome is in relation to Labor's last budget, the 13-14 financial year. And so what has happened in recent weeks and months in terms of commodity prices had no bearing on the 13-14
No,
budget
I'm wondering
outcome,
if that drop is going to affect your projections in your year.
Well, look, the point I would make here is this. When we came into government in September last year, we inherited a deteriorating budget position, a weakening economy and rising unemployment. And you might remember that just for the 13-14 financial year, between the budget being delivered in May last year and the economic update just before the election, the budget deficit deteriorated by more than $1 billion a week. Now, our objective before Christmas last year in our first mid-year economic and fiscal outlook was to provide a true representation of the true state of the budget, to provide an update which was based on realistic forecasts with realistic assumptions. And what you will find, if you look back at the figures that we released then, is that we predicted a deficit for 13-14 as we had inherited it of $47 billion. We came in at $48.5 billion, which was pretty well on par with what we said would happen. Now, you know, obviously, we will stand by our performance against budget. Like the previous government, lost a lot of credibility because their budget forecasts inevitably were proven wrong within weeks, materially proven wrong. The previous government consistently overestimated revenue and underestimated expenditure, dramatically so. Obviously, you know, moving forward, we will be judged, you know, to the extent that our actual budget outcomes will match, you know, our forecasts, and if there are variations, whether we have got reasonable explanations for those variations.
Okay, I wanted to bring up tax because you would have seen the front page of the Fairfax newspapers today, quoting a tax report that claims 84% of the top 200 ASX companies pay below the 30% company tax rate. A full third of them pay below 10%. Was there anything in that report that shocked you?
Well, it was a report that was put forward, you know, by the union movement. So I mean, let's just
unions
sort of
and
say that
charities
right up front.
And charities,
but
number of charities.
Let me just make the general point that obviously, from the Australian government's point of view, we expect every business that generates profits in Australia, be that a domestically operating business, multinational or whatever, any business that generates profits in Australia, we expect them to pay their fair share of tax in Australia. Now, our advice is that our anti-avoidance laws are among the toughest in the world. That doesn't mean that we don't need to keep focusing on making things better and continuing to lift our performance on that front. And indeed, the tax administration, the tax office itself needs to continue to focus on doing its job better. And of course, at an international level, we are working with countries around the world to ensure that there is a coordinated response when it comes to multinational tax-related issues.
I'll get to the global situation in a minute, but just on the local side, does a report like this, and I agree, you know, it does come from the unions and charities and churches. The churches wouldn't lie, I'm sure, Senator Cormann, but does it undermine...
Not-for-profits who don't pay.
Does it undermine the push by the business community to cut corporate taxes when so many of them aren't even paying the full price anyway? Perfectly legally, but they're managing to get away with it.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, are you suggesting that people shouldn't be able to claim deductions for legitimate business expenses?
No, I'm not. I'm saying it's legal, but I'm wondering why they push so hard to get more tax relief when obviously they can use the system to cut it anyway.
Well, look, I mean, the bottom line is this. Any business that generates profits in Australia should pay their fair share of tax consistent with the laws of the land. But having said that, I mean, obviously businesses do incur legitimate business expenses as they generate those profits. And, these are matters that are appropriately, independently and not politically administered by the Australian Tax Office under the leadership of the Tax Commissioner, Chris Jordan. I mean, I don't think that the administration of our tax laws ever should be subject to partisan politics. Now, when it comes to our anti-avoidance laws, we do have very tough anti-avoidance laws. There's no two ways about it. We're always looking whether there are sensible opportunities to improve them, whether there is a need to respond to new and recent developments in the marketplace. Inevitably, that is always going to be part of the yin and yang between governments raising revenue and, I guess, taxpayers paying taxes. But look, I mean, the fundamental point, as I've said, is, of course, business is expected to pay their fair share of tax consistent with the law in relation to the profits they generate here in Australia.
So do you think, say, a Glencore or companies that aren't paying anything, do you think that's fair? If it's legal, that's fine then.
Well, I'm sure that you would not expect me to comment on the individual tax affairs on individual
it was just a try.
Taxpayers. But, well, sure. But I mean, the point is this: like, I mean, obviously it's very difficult in any event, even if I wasn't constrained by privacy considerations, to make generally informed comment without actually being aware of all of the ins and outs of the specific.
Let me talk about the broader picture and the issue on the global side, because this has become a big issue. It keeps being mentioned at all the G20 meetings. What about the story this week that this global clampdown on tax shifting, led by the US president as well as our own, that when Chris Jordan, as you mentioned him, our tax commissioner, has started this, that there's been some pushback from the American companies and American congressmen claiming, oh, it's just a tax grab on American companies. Does that concern you, that when you actually do start to do what the political will is, that it's going to run into this problem, this political problem?
No, it doesn't concern me at all. I mean, the truth is that there is nothing, there's nothing wrong with Australia asserting its sovereignty in relation to profits generated in Australia. Profits generated in Australia by businesses operating in Australia obviously are subject to Australian tax laws, and of course there is an absolutely appropriate expectation, and indeed the government has the responsibility to ensure that those businesses pay their fair share of tax in Australia. You're
standing behind Chris Jordan. You would not agree with US criticism. You don't think he's being too aggressive, our tax office?
Not at all. The government absolutely stands behind Chris Jordan. He's doing a very important job for Australia in that regard. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about raising the necessary funds to fund the important services of government.
Senator Cormann, just a couple of quick ones before we run out of time. The FOFA reforms, there's talk, there's still some political argy-bargy that needs to go. It's going to go to a vote, I gather, and there's talk in the next week. Are you confident the Palmer support will stand, they will go through?
Well, firstly, I'm very confident that the Palmer United Party and the Australian Motoring Enthusiast Party will, stick to the agreement that we have reached. And I guess the general point I would make is never believe what you read in the newspaper. I mean, the newspapers, including papers like the Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald and so on, they all predicted on several occasions that our improvements to our future financial advice laws would go down. They did so in June, they did so in July, they're doing so again now. Look, I mean, from my point of view, we're just working through the parliamentary process in an orderly and methodical fashion. These are important reforms. We took them to the last election, and we are now quite confident that they still have the support of the Senate.
Were you concerned your message was undermined by that about-face by the Financial Services Council, then claiming that there's a lack of trust and they need government help to help the industry get its credibility back?
Well, there was a mixing up of several issues, and it was a bit unfortunate for the Financial Services Council how different issues got, I guess, pulled together. The truth is that the Financial Services Council is very strongly supportive of the improvements the government has pursued to our future financial advice laws, and I encourage you to ask them, and I'm sure that they would confirm that. What we are having quite separately is a conversation across the whole industry on how best to keep lifting professional, ethical and educational standards across the financial advice profession. Now, a number of organisations have done...
I'm just going to interrupt you there because we've only got a minute left, and I know it's a hard question in a minute, but just, if you could just do a quick answer, are you as concerned about this current debate with the RBA, the FIRB on foreign buying of housing and a housing bubble? If you could just sum up where you as Finance Minister, how concerned are you on the housing issue at the moment, which is big?
Well, there is an inquiry going on at the moment. I let that inquiry do its work, and you know, we'll form some judgments once we've been able to consider those reports.
So not losing sleep over a housing crisis at the moment?
Well, I've given you the best answer that I can give you at this point.
A very careful one, as usual. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Look forward to talking to you again, Senator Cormann.
Always good to be here, and I'll be back.
Thank you very much. That was Finance Minister Senator Cormann, and that's it for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow night for Tech Tuesday, where we try and encourage innovation and our campaign to keep Australia clever. Don't miss it. See you then.